Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Dear Esther Landmark Edition. So, I've slept in between the last recording and this one, which probably isn't going to do a lot of favors for a walking simulator game that is 100% really about the narrative, because I have to dismiss the 50% of the visuals and the audio, as almost certainly all of the video, all of the visuals, all of the audio is just bought by the original creator through the Unity Asset Store. And since this is a remaster, all these visuals may be fairly different from what the original version of Dear Esther, which you can't even buy in comparison on Steam. That's in part why I really love to see remasters and remakes of games where you can hit the back button and then swap the visuals to the original visual and just compare, even if it is a feature that you tend not to use. But yeah, there is something to be said in the composition, the artistic action of cutting and pasting a material, visuals, audio that other people made. And I'm effectively discounting that unfairly when the audio playing right now actually is pretty good. The visuals here, as far as the composition, is actually pretty good. If anything, I would say the composition of the narrative is the most disconnected from everything else. It's more of a mystery of two stories, and maybe those two stories will merge together at the end. We fell down or walked down this hole and broke our flashlight, so there was one gameplay element gone now, and we're halfway, I think, through the game, and the story is claiming that our character is injured and probably dying and setting himself up to die on this island that seems abandoned, and is going down this path of this cave to follow this bioluminescent paint slash mold. This feels more like mold. We saw bioluminescent or luminescent paint in cans in the previous sections. Now apparently we're just automatically crouching down, which is gonna slow down the experience even more. I feel like a game like this could really benefit from having a much smaller dead zone around the outside of an analog stick, where you just hit your maximum speed with even a slight push. It's kind of awkward that I just have this natural stance in which I'm pushing the control stick halfway, and it's this slow creeping crawl when I can push it full and at least move fairly quickly. And yeah, you're just walking through here waiting until they say something, until the main character says something. Feels like there should be something on the wall there. That might be an example of composition in which you've put too many things too naturally together, and that too unnaturally together. It's not random enough. So it feels like you've made this square outline to imply that something should be there. There's a whole nother path that way. In a lot of ways, all of this just kind of boils down to finding points.
It was as if someone had taken the car and shaken it like a cocktail. The glove compartment had been opened and emptied with the ashtrays and the boot. It made for a crumpled museum, a shattered exhibition.
So yeah, we're seeing chemicals, different chemicals now, written, and symbols, and what look like electronic symbols and plants all getting mixed together. He's still very simplistically describing the car crash that Esther died in. We have candles lit, and it's questionable who lit these candles. Yeah, this definitely is electric circuits diagrams here. There's no way around that. But I honestly think that is the default randomness here, is that sometimes when you play this game you'll see an electric circuit diagram on this wall in this spot, and sometimes you'll see chemicals, and sometimes you'll see a plant, and maybe they'll pull some kind of trick to try and explain that this is, there are 3 different interpretations of this story. Like maybe you're supposed to be high and that's why you're seeing chemicals, maybe you're a robot and that's why you're seeing diagrams, maybe you're seeing plants because you're just supposed to be organic human life. There's no puzzle here, though, as far as I can tell. It's not like I'm seeing a hint towards a final puzzle and a solution, which that would be kind of impossible to implement because you always are loading into a new chapter and it's all one way. So if I was needing to come back to this area to find a solution to one final puzzle at the very end of the game, I couldn't come back to the end of the game. This is like a nerve cell, it looks like, which could easily be confused for a plant. The shapes of things in nature have a lot to do with mathematics and geometry and recursive designs, which, without failing miserably to try and explain it, which I would fail miserably trying to explain it, creates this situation where cells and plants and trees and things in nature just naturally all tend to have similar shapes, whereas electric circuitry diagrams are more simplistic geometry. Yeah. What I really would wish, though, for a game called Dear Esther, is that we would have a lot more talk about Esther as a character. I would prefer to find things related to Esther in the world that give little bits of flavor and description of that character. If anything, that's something Gone Home does a really good job of, is that you have this sister that you're learning more about her as she grew, as you were away at a military academy, I believe is where you were, or at college or something like that. So you as the older sister had been gone, your younger sister had a whole major life-changing event, and you're learning about that. Plus, you're walking around this home and you're seeing a lot of things that you have nostalgia for, or the protagonist character has nostalgia for, but the player doesn't have nostalgia for because the player doesn't know about it until he finds that item. So you'll find like a old video game cartridge in Gone Home, and then there'll be a whole conversation about that, or you'll find a journal entry or something like that. And this game just doesn't feel like it's doing that there's not even really an ambition here for a story, which inherently the idea of not being really capable at making graphics, which is what asset flipping would be. And usually when I describe a game as an asset flip, I'm just using it as a completely 100% derogative way to dismiss a game. But in this case, there's a slightly higher level of quality and effort in it. But yeah, particularly in this landmark edition, where these are, I'm assuming, all just textures and assets made by somebody else, then you would hope that the ambition there would be supplanted by having a desire to do more writing. But it is important to make a comparison here that I think a lot of Western mainstream video game journalists either intentionally or just ignorantly failed to make, which is, if Dear Esther was a visual novel, if in that aspect you were just making flat 2D images that were animated uniquely for Dear Esther, you would then be targeting 20, 40, 80, 120,000 words in your narrative, because that's what visual novels have been, and visual novels have been around much longer than Dear Esther has been. And yeah, when you start to compare the narrative of Dear Esther to a visual novel, it's pathetically short in the amount of words being used, and the amount of things being said. Most of the other games that are somewhat walking simulator-like that I've played have been that's an interesting effect, but is that an effect that even was in the main game? That's another thing I'm really thinking about, is how much of what we're seeing right now has been just added. Like, maybe the original Dear Esther game was barely 3D. Maybe the original Dear Esther game was just a flat 2D game where you were clicking left and right to move from one area to the other. If that was the case, then I would say Dear Esther, the original version, would have been closer to something like The Manhole, which was just a infinitely wandering game for little kids made by the makers of Myst before they made Myst. But in a lot of ways, even if the original Dear Esther was 3D, there's way too much of empty walking here. This is almost like a tech demo that you might expect to see in the early days of PC gaming. Just the idea of walking around a cave. The voice acting I appreciate in any game where story is a focus, but almost certainly you could have budgeted better by having written dialogue pop up on the screen and getting back to something like a visual novel. There are definitely some Western visual novels. They tend to be made by Western people, and by Western I mean not Japanese, Chinese, or Korean people, that are pathetically short. Beat the entire visual novel in 5 minutes type experience. And yeah, sadly, Dear Esther kind of falls in that same grouping, even with fancy visuals. And it's hard to quantify, certainly, but when you have an asset store and an artist is making a texture for walls, rocks, books, things like that, particularly things that are more unique. A book more than a wall and a rock, by far. There is a inability, or less of an ability, to use those art assets in your own game or in a better game when other games have already used them. That uniqueness falls apart. It is effectively, I guess, somewhat close to the Wilhelm scream in movies, which is effectively an Easter egg that audio editors love to do, and almost every movie that has a scream in it has the Wilhelm scream in it in some way. They pitch it and change it a lot of times, so it's not exactly the same sound effect. But yeah, if a red barrel is used in one game, subconsciously at least, gamers will notice if that same red barrel was used in a different game. I would say, director-wise, the idea of going down the cave really hurts your opportunities to have items that would trigger more lines of dialogue. And noticeably, we haven't had but one small bit of conversation so far, which means the right way to play this is to just push as fast as possible and walk as fast as possible. If I was going to make a tech demo where you're wandering around the cave, I wouldn't do it, frankly. It's too simplistic of an idea. But if I had to, I would make branching paths, I'd make a puzzle, I'd have either some kind of mushroom picking or flower picking element to gather resources of some sort. Mining, effectively, might be an idea. I probably would want to have enemies. If I'm not going to have enemies, I would want to have some signs of life. There should be some creatures skittering around. This lifeless environment, underground even, of animals at least, is making the environment not feel particularly real, nor is it pushing it to kind of a scary aspect. Like, if we saw insects that might spook people, maybe that's not what they're really going for. I half suspect we walk out of this cave and we're not back on the island. That we are in some completely different area. Clearly this has been made so that you slowly walk this direction and get revealed some image. So it would be interesting if you walk this direction and you see a city instead of an empty island. But no. It's just a bunch of stalagmites, stalactites. I always get those confused, and you can see they're
I am
in
traveling through my
lines.
own body, following the line of infection from the shattered femur towards the heart. I swallow fistfuls of painkillers to stay lucid. In my delirium, I see the twin lights of the moon and the aerial shining to me through the rocks.
So yeah, I don't really see a reason why you would have these long lines like this. It doesn't feel natural. Yep. If anything, it feels like the narrative now is pushing towards the main protagonist dying. And we have several branching paths here. The controller vibrated when I jumped down there. So that's supposed to be a K. Is that supposed to be an indication of which way to go? You could potentially have a game at that aspect, certainly, if this was a maze and you had to interpret the writings on the wall to find a way out of the maze, and then the maze was randomly generated. I assume that what happens here is that's just the end, and there's a bunch of little paper boats there. Interesting as a hint. And I got an achievement for walking over this direction, I believe. Which does imply that there are achievements just for walking in specific spots. The achievement was Man of the Rocks. Whatever that's supposed to mean. But yeah, I guess if you needed a cave maze navigator game and you wanted to make it interactive, having randomly generated paths with randomly generated codes that you had to learn each time could be an interesting mechanic, and it would also imply a lot of effort was put into programming something with actual algorithms and code to justify it being randomly generated, whereas it's just a lot of painting. Otherwise, if you are designing something in Unity, or designing an environment in Unity, you do it once, you put whatever level of artistic intent into it that you have that first time, and then see, this feels like a switch or an indicator of a switch. And yeah, you could definitely make more of a game if there were doors that required actions or keys to open. Sounds to me like there might be a random sound effect that played here the first time we're here. If there are random sound effects of any importance, though, it would make sense for the sound effects to loop and play again. Interesting. Wind. I heavily question what would the director's commentary even be for a section like this. If you don't have enough dialogue in the game in the first place, one could only hope that the original creator is the director in the director's commentary, and he has become much more vocal in talking about the director's commentary versus what the game itself is. Suppose it is a possibility that this game was designed to be really small in size, but it's really not that old of a game to justify that. Even if you were putting it on some kind of like Newgrounds type website, some kind of indie itch.io type website instead of Steam, I still don't feel like you would have to target, say, 5 megabytes, and that's why there's such a small amount of text. Honestly, it would never make sense in the first place, because for every bit of text you write, maybe 10 times that size would be audio, and 10 times that size, or 100 times that size, would be video. So having the video, having the audio in it, will take up all the significant amount of space in any kind of game. I do suppose you could use something like Google Lens. I don't know if there's any other real service that does this, and take a picture of these chemicals, and it very possibly would tell you what the chemicals are. There might be a more bespoke chemical notes-taking camera app too out there. So you could cheat fairly well. Although cheating for what? It seems like you just look at these things. The only thing that could be fairly annoying about this is that we get all the way through the game. I spend the extra effort to go through the developer commentary, and I still miss an achievement. But even at that rate, I could probably run through this game in an hour. So if I looked up a walkthrough to get the last achievement, then that would be fairly easy to accomplish. It's also very believable that some players would just get bored of looking at all of this and walk right past it, or just never even see it. I can't really buy into the argument, like for this sequence here, that there isn't going to be some percentage of players who want to look over here on the lit spot, which is what the camera's directing your eye to as far as positive space, instead of negative space over here that is only got a little bit of positive imagery and lit spots with the writing. So very easily I could see you just paying attention on this scene, on this frame, to the 3/4 of the screen on the left that's lit up much brighter, and totally ignoring what's on the right side. So that's potentially another example of just bad composition. But I could also see players just running towards the end. So increasingly now we're seeing these crystals and diamonds. So it just is a weird diamond mine, and that people don't seem to have actually mined it. It almost looks like it's rows of teeth, and we can only really go one way. And yeah, we could take him literally and say he actually is inside of his own body.
This is a drowned man's face, reflected in the moonlit waters. It can only be a dead shepherd who has come to drunk drive you home.
So it does seem to me like in that statement that it was the husband that was drinking and driving and killed Esther in the car, which maybe means that the husband is the protagonist that we're playing as, although it almost might be a case that the person I'm playing as, this is like a symbol for a transformer. But yeah, I guess if I hadn't taken electronics and didn't have a hobby in circuit design and electronics, at least a small interest in it, I wouldn't know what that is, in the same way that you could easily not know what chemical symbols and composition signs are. The most interesting thing I think you could probably do as far as having a twist, if this game is going to have a twist, would be to... I feel like I should go down here. Not really seeing anything in there though. And it's weird you can swim at all. That's actually more programming and control than you usually have in a game. Although I'm not sure I can totally get out of the water. Yeah, it would be an interesting twist if the character we're playing as has just like no connection whatsoever to the characters or the narratives. This is like the second time we've seen text, "Behold, Damascus is taken." And that would be, I guess, the second time we've had something talked about that is more biblical in nature, and big, long electric circuit on this side, and long chemicals, nerves, cells on this side. Damascus is taken. This all is now merging into the scramblings of a lunatic on the wall, it feels like. And yeah, Damascus is taken is now backwards. So I would just expect that there's, away from being a city, and it shall be ruins. Hell, I can't even read it. Like, this is like one of those examples of having something hand drawn instead of having it readable in a readable font is a problem. That's another thing Gone Home had a great feature too, is that you could just change the text into a very readable font. Yeah. I just don't think there's anything's gonna happen here. And unfortunately, I think I'm gonna just end this episode here, and then we'll probably have a load into the 4th chapter. But yeah, it definitely seems like there should have been a big reveal, and maybe we will see a big reveal, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's just more cave for the rest of the game. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.